arguments against Christian faith is that not only does evil exist, but that evil happens to good people. And Job is probably the quintessential example of bad stuff happening to a good person. Now, we have the benefit of that whole heavenly view in the first couple of chapters, and we know what's going on. The hard part about this story is Job doesn't. Job does not know what's going on. And Job thinks, remember we said in the opening chapters when Job comments, the thing I feared most has come upon me. What did we kind of come to an opinion that he was talking about? I've put my faith in you, God. I've laid it all on the line. I have done everything that you've asked me to do, and now it looks like you have washed out on me. Okay? And again, that is not an uncommon thought process. I mean, even Jesus himself from the cross said what? My God, why have you forsaken me? Now we know there are theological implications to that and why he said that. And yet in saying that, is he not like us, where for the first time ever in his life, Jesus feels the separation between God and fallen humanity? Okay? He becomes even more like us because we too feel that distance, that separation from God. Okay? And so as we come through the conclusion of the dialogue and banter that's gone back and forth between Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and Job, we want to keep clearly in focus what we are trying to extract from the book of Job, what God has to say to us about we as believers living our lives and not only experiencing difficulty, but Job even takes it a degree further because God opened the door. God allowed Job to go into this testing. Count it all joy when you fall into trials of every sort. Okay? Count it all joy. Is that not an oxymoron?
Full time.
But it doesn't fit our model, does it? Okay. The other one is a Paul-related one from 2 Corinthians, where whatever his thorn in the flesh was, maybe one day we'll get to ask him. I don't know. But the whole idea of my strength is made perfect in your weakness. There is something that God is accomplishing. We will see that in Job's life. We will see that God was working something in Job, and you'll get a little bit of a window into it when we look at Elihu's comments tonight. But we, so this whole idea of Christian suffering and why would God allow that to happen? That's all a part of the kingdom of God in this world and the process that God is taking us through. Job 22, 1 through 11. Job asks the question, Eliphaz asks the question, what benefit does God have from humanity? Job is complaining about his condition and what's going on with him. And Eliphaz asks, I think, a very valuable question. He says, does God need us in some way? How is God? Job, you think you're such a good guy. How does that benefit God in any way? How do we make God better? And Eliphaz is really taking Job to task for his insistence on his righteousness. I'm a good guy. I don't deserve this. I'm a good guy. And Eliphaz says, hey, so how does that make God better?
Yeah.
What does he need from you, Job? He doesn't need anything from us. God doesn't need our righteousness. Eliphaz says something to that effect, doesn't it? Yeah. Verse 3, what pleasure would it give the Almighty if you were righteous? Now, I think there is certainly a level of pleasure that we know God derives from our following in His way. But that's not really what Eliphaz is getting at here. Job is kind of insisting that in the face of evidence that seems to be to the contrary, somehow he's better than all of that. And Eliphaz is saying, so, okay, so that's true. What does that do for God? How does that make God better? Verses 4 through 11, Job kind of lists Eliphaz lists again what he thinks are Job's sins. Where did we see evidence to the exact contrary of that? That Job did not oppress the poor. In fact, he did just the opposite.
Right.
In the opening chapter, he does. And then about chapter 29, Job describes the things that he did. And he talked about defending the widow. And he talked about being a father to the orphan. And he talked about giving to the needs of the poor. And he begins to enumerate all of the things that were part of his life and that people had seen. And it's ironic here, isn't it, that Eliphaz accuses him of the very things that Job has. It's been obvious to the public that Job has done just the opposite. But Eliphaz kind of gets into a mode here. Part of our reading that we've just done, our daily Bible reading that we've just come through, was through the book of Deuteronomy. And as it comes to the end of Deuteronomy, Moses spends a lot of time talking about obedience. Mm-hmm. And I was reflecting on that as I was reading it, because there is obedience is not the key to our salvation. Obedience is the response that we have toward God because of our salvation. I didn't try to do all the things that Sherry wanted me to do to win her heart. I tried to show her the kind of person I was and let that win her heart. But once I won her heart, I continued to show her how much I love her by doing the things that please her. Most of the time. Most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. I just thought I'd cover my bases here. Got to be careful that I do that. Okay, now keep in mind what Eliphaz says to Job. Just turn back to God. Open your heart to God. Turn back to God. And look at what Job's response is in the opening verses of chapter 23.
To be there.
If I could just find him. If I have ever been there? Ever been there? Knew Jesus, loved Jesus, but found ourselves at a place that you cry out at the top of your voice, and he seems to be not listening, or on a vacation, or whatever other example. Job is stuck in his predicament. That's part of the human condition too, isn't it? Is stuck in his predicament. Do we extend the tests of our lives? Do we make them longer than they need to be by our response to them? It's an amazing thing when you look at the scriptures that our joy level is directly proportionate to our obedience. To the degree that you and I walk in obedience to God, we will find joy. And where we cut corners, matter of fact, there's a passage where Jesus, it's a messianic psalm, and the Messiah is speaking, or they're speaking about the Messiah, and he says, because you have, I'm drawing a blank on the exact phraseology of it now, but in essence, the paraphrase is, because you loved my word, I have poured out the oil of joy upon you above all your brethren. Because you have loved my word and you've loved to do what pleases me, I have poured out the oil of joy on you. There's a direct correlation. But there are times when we're stuck. There are times in the tests of our lives we get stuck. And it can look to people, look to you, like you're never going to come out of this thing. And it can really look, does that help you when you read? Aren't those words plaintive? If only I knew where to find him. If only I could go to his dwelling. Job's not being arrogant there. Job is speaking out of the pain of his heart. Okay? And how many times do we find ourselves stuck in a situation and we feel like God's against us, and we just can't get out of that. That's certainly where Job's at. Verses 8 and 9, he says, but I can't find God. I look in every direction for him, but he's not to be found. And then verses 10 through 12. These are great verses. But he knows the way I take. And when he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed his steps. I have kept to his way without turning aside. I have not departed from the commands of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread. Do you see in Job where one minute he's totally overwhelmed by his test, and then the next minute he throws out this zinger of faith and insight into who God is? These verses 10, 11, and 12 are verses that are, I think, communicate a faith that was in Job. He knows the way that I take, and I know the kind of person that I've tried to be. And when the test comes, those are the things that help hold us steady, help keep us locked in. Okay, chapter 24 continues. Verses 1 through 12, and this is Job continuing to talk. Verses 1 through 12. When will judgment day come? How long will all of this stuff get to go on and no judgment? Okay, now what are the three buddies appealing to? They're appealing to a righteous God, aren't they? And Job is looking at the situation. He says, okay, a righteous God, when's he going to act? When is he going to step in and begin taking into hand these awful circumstances and situations? Do you ever look at the news and wonder that? And wonder just how long, God, are you going to let our culture continue to go on the meandering path that it's taking? And then it seems to me that Job is saying, around verse 12, it's kind of out of the context. Job says, the wrongs are committed, no justice is dispensed, and God doesn't do anything about it, but I'm being punished. But I'm being taken to task. And then he goes on to the end of the chapter, and he talks about how that God takes away the security of those who have tried to honor him. Verses 22 through 24. God drags away the mighty by his power. Though they become established, they have no assurance of life. He may let them rest in a feeling of security, but his eyes are on their ways. For a little while they are exalted, and then they are gone. They are brought low and gathered up like all others. They are cut off like the heads of grain. Why is it important there that he talks about the mighty? Or is it possible that he's also talking about those who have succeeded and have become successful? Not necessarily wicked, just people who have achieved a place. They've achieved some kind of security because they've worked hard, they've worked to accomplish something with their lives, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, they're cut off. They're cut off. And all that they've put effort into, all of their diligence, it comes back to this frustration about the righteousness, or about God allowing bad things to happen to good people. Look at chapter 25. You're going to get a kick out of this one. I just had one sentence to encapsulate that chapter. How can a maggot like you be right before God?